An example in the empty bracket method, and this time the questions are slightly more difficult. So we're looking at part 1, and the first thing we do when an example is written like this is we copy out the actual question. So the question says x squared minus x plus 5 on the square root of x. We're now going to employ the empty bracket method. To remind you, the empty bracket is wherever you see a letter, you put an empty bracket. So that x is now being replaced by an empty bracket. This 2 is written in the same position as it was on the previous line. We then write the minus sign, and the x is replaced by an empty bracket. And then we've got plus 5 on, now this is called a square root symbol. And inside the square root symbol, because there's an x, we replace the x by the empty bracket. To signify the square root symbol ends, we put a little notch at the end. Now, we have to go back and we have to read the question. And really, I should have written this down first. But in the question, we were told that x is equal to 4. And so that now means that since every single empty bracket for this particular question was x, it's every single bracket gets replaced by the 4. Now, you are allowed to use calculators, but I think today we're going to break this down. And 4 squared is equal to 16. Then we've got minus 4 plus 5. Now, the square root of 4 is, it is 2. So the square root of 4 is 2, which is still left inside a bracket. And then we can work this out. It's going to be 16 minus 4 plus 10. And then we do 16 take 4 is 12. 12 plus 10 is going to be 22. Now, bearing in mind that we are allowed to use calculators in the test, what I would encourage you to do now is to get your calculators out and go back to the line that I have just asterisked and type that line into your calculator exactly as it's written. And when you finish typing it in, you press the equals sign and you should get 22. So that's the end of example number 2, part 1. And we're now going to explore example part 2. Now, I am going to correct maybe the omission that I made earlier. The first thing you should do when you're reading the question, you should identify the values for each letter and you should write them down next to where you're doing the working out. So from the question, I've identified that A is 3.25, that B is equal to 9, and now I'm going to use the empty bracket method on the square root of A to be squared minus B. So now we're going to employ the empty bracket method. So wherever we see a letter, we're going to replace it with an empty bracket, and I'm going to extend the square root symbol to the end. What goes inside the first empty bracket? Well, the empty bracket is representing the A, and the A is 3.25. So we've got 3.25. And the second empty bracket represents the B, and we know from over here that B is equal to 9, and we put 9 inside that empty bracket. Then what we do, this is very important for future work, this is a break in what we said earlier on, is when you've got a single square root like this on its own, you should always work out what's inside the square root first. So you write down the square root symbol, you reach for your calculator, and you now type in bracket 3.25, close bracket, power of 2, minus open bracket, 9, close bracket, and the answer is 25 over 16. 25 over 16. So we now write inside this 25 over 16. If you want to write that as a decimal, that's up to you. But very often in this course, the number that you get in fraction form is easily square rootable. What is the square root of 25? Just hold that in your heads for a moment. And you know the square root of 25 is what? Yes, it is. It's 5. Well done. The square root of 25 is 5. Now, again, just before I move on to the next part of this video, you can pause it and just ask yourself this question. What's the square root of 16? What's the square root of 16? What's the square root of 16? Yes, it is. It's 4, and you hold that in your heads. So now you've actually got the answer as 5 over 4. You could actually write that as 1.25. If you'd written this as a decimal up here, I can't remember what my calculator said when it was written as a decimal. I think it's 1.5625. 1.5625. You would still get full marks for doing that. There's no right way of doing it. And if you press the square root button and then press the SD button for this, you will get 1.25. The important thing in mathematics nowadays is knowing your way round your calculator. So the questions, as I remind you, are at the beginning of the video at the top of the screen. There they are now. You can pause the video, you can copy them down. And please check your answers in the back of the book and make sure you've got them right. If you haven't got them right, you should give the questions another go. You've probably made just a bit of a silly mistake.